Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to yet another edition of the Pune COVID Knowledge Exchange. This comes to us through the participation and support of AFMC alumni and their friends, and is a collaboration with many institutions, including Bharati Vidyapeeth in Pune, and of course, AFMC alumni and others from many different institutions. And also an important partner is the NGO JAPIGO, which is very involved in capacity building, and in this case in Pune. And this is coming because of our collaboration with ECHO India, which is providing the platform to hold these sessions. We want to clarify that this is a two-way exchange of knowledge. It's not a webinar, it's not a grand rounds. So we all participate, we all teach, and we all learn. Today, we have a really exciting program, and we have Dr. Rajiv Saini, who's coming to us from Kolkata, from the Command Hospital, Eastern Command there. And then we'll have Dr. Jyoti Shetty from Bharati Vidyapeeth. They're both psychiatrists, and they're going to talk to us today about mental health concerns in COVID. And Dr. Saini will start with the patient's concerns. So over to you, Dr. Saini. You have control, and go forward with your slides and your presentation.
Okay, thank you, sir. I hope my slide is visible, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So at the outset, I want to wish all the listeners a very happy Eid. It's an auspicious day today. And on that note, I'll begin my presentation. So I'll be talking about the mental health concerns from the patient's perspective. Of late, we have been hearing a lot about COVID, mental health issues, mental health. And in fact, why so much noise? There are many physical illnesses like tuberculosis, leprosy, HIV, who have since ages, they have affected humanity, but the mental health issues were not at the forefront so much. But ever since the information explosion since past few years, so even a small issue becomes a huge noise or a loud explosion. So, but why so much noise about COVID and mental health issues related to COVID? It is basically the storm of information as well as misinformation. Because what happens, there is a rush for publications, rush for gaining attention, and the data collectors, they go into frenzy as and when any event happens around the world. Now, this particular event had an element of uncertainty and insecurity. Actually, nobody really knew much about this illness and what are the exact pathogenesis and what systems get affected and how long the illness may last and what are the treatment modalities, how it spreads and whom it can affect. So a lot of uncertainty around this particular illness, and it has led to insecurity among citizens. So that is why there is so much noise about COVID as well as the mental health issues pertaining to insecurity, uncertainty, worry, and anxiety, and so many things. So whenever such a situation happens, we always try to look for a quick solution. At least I should be safe or my family member should be safe. So what should I do? So they will do, in fact, they may overkill as far as the preventive strategies and treatment strategies are concerned. So, but there is a lot of desperation and it is felt across the world, across cultures and across populations. And they're willing to spend any amount of money or any amount of resources seeking a quick solution. And definitely there is an element of political mileage. Whosoever offers quicker solution or earliest solution to the whole thing, will win eventually. So there is a race to get attention on that front as well. There's no denying the fact there is a significant morbidity as well as mortality, and these numbers are reflected on every platform, on every news channel, in every newspaper. It is repeatedly being projected, so it causes a lot of alarm in the populations. So that is why there is so much noise, and that also makes us believe that we must learn a little bit more, or maybe share a little bit more information about the whole issue. So that is why platforms like this, they help us, so that at least we can filter out relevant information and apply it to ourselves as well as the people whom we care for. So it basically boils down to excessive worries, as I said earlier, fear of unknown, anxiety, and depression. When I say the word anxiety, it pertains to a normal physiological reaction to any untoward or a difficult event which may affect our integrity or our feeling of being well within ourselves. So it manifests in the form of palpitations, insomnia, muscle discomfort or muscle tightness, excessive abdominal movements, frequency of micturition, and the worry that something untoward may happen to me or my family member. When I use the word depression, I mean to say it is a feeling of gloom or sadness which persists beyond few days. It is generally accompanied by lack of interest, inability to enjoy pleasurable activities, fatigability or getting tired very easily, and believes that I am not good, or maybe my life is not worth living, or I should rather die, and feeling of hopelessness that nothing is there for me to get in future. So, so it all leads to change in attitudes and cultural practices. They could be either good or bad. Good, when I say good, because they help us to survive or they help us to remain well. For example, hygiene, sanitation, or in medical parlance, whenever we use hand sanitizer before we touch the patient, or we remove our shoes whenever we enter the ICU, or we put a PPE clothing. So they are good changes in our attitudes and behaviors, but at the same time, there are bad behaviors also, or hypochondriacal behaviors also, like discrimination towards infected persons causing stigma or making him feel like he has done some crime, or overdoing things at home, like washing all the furniture items or washing everything that comes inside the house, or spraying with a sanitizer expensive medical equipment or expensive electronic gadgets at home repeatedly, so much so that it becomes a hindrance to your day-to-day living. So the change in attitudes and cultural practices can be either good or bad. So we have to basically supply the correct information and support those who are in need of help, and adopting the correct SOPs or the practices for remaining all right and keeping people around us all right. It's important to go into history so that our future behaviors take the correct course of action. We all know about Spanish flu, plague, MERS, SARS. They have happened in the past. So they are not something which happened about which we don't know. However, if you just gather more information, you will appreciate that majority of the wars her oxygen saturation dipped further. She was breathless as night, but she says, I should not give up. If I give up, I will die. I was sad, stressed, anxious, depressed, and cried. and she was all by herself. There were no family member was allowed to be with her, and she was just one patient in the ICU. There were many more, and nobody really talked to her or any comfort was given. So she was lost in her own world. She thought of her daughter. Thinking about daughter gave her strength that I must live for her. Support from my husband and doctor gave me hope. That is what she says. So I was chanting, praying, and meditating to get all the positive vibes from all angles. She was trying everything that could keep her going. Messages from friends kept me happy and motivated. It's not the body that suffers, but mental and emotional health. Learn that when your body and soul are strong, the body can fight and survive any odds. So there lies the importance of willpower. She had strong willpower. So that's how she survived. Now she says that storm has passed. Now I'm recovering with all the best wishes from everyone. In the end, she does not fail to thank the God. That eventually the God will help her to survive. So here we can have a poll question like what type of psychiatric intervention is recommended for the patient during initial phase of her illness. So first is no specific treatment should be offered. Benzodiazepine can be given because she was sleepless. A comforting human touch that can be provided, or a family therapy. So, any one of, I think everybody is in agreement. So, so that goes beyond saying more comforting and reassuring touch by the caregiver. So, who are the caregivers? The healthcare workers um, or the doctor. So they are the ones they can reassuring touch or a comforting words can actually make a lot of difference. She said that they gave me hope. So how do I move ahead, sir?
You're at the bottom. Go back to your screen.
Yeah.
You can look at your PowerPoint and
Yeah.
see at the left bottom.
Yeah. So this
Yeah.
is from the second patient and what he went through and what is his experience. So he is a 51-year-old patient. So he says that he had 14 days of hospitalization, multiple injections containing steroid, remdesivir, antibiotics, intravenous fluids, and a lot of deaths happened around him. He experienced a lot of weakness, poor appetite, multiple body aches and pains, and he had strong worries about long-term sequelae. Yeah, what will happen to my lungs? Will I be my normal self? What will happen to my memory? Will it again become normal? And he had persisting insomnia and fatigue. Still, he has all these symptoms. It's been about 2-3 months. He continues to have these symptoms. So here we can have a poll question. Should I paste it, sir? Or anybody else can do that for me?
The question.
I'm launching polls.
Okay, I can. So I can create a new slide and then.
No.
All right. Yeah. So what specific intervention is indicated for case number 2? Firstly is antidepressant from 14th day of illness, mood stabilizer from 10th day of treatment, formal assessment after 2 weeks of illness, or no specific intervention is indicated. So participants can, okay, I think again we had a bullseye here. So everybody is in agreement that a formal assessment after 2 weeks is the norm. That is how it should be. Yeah, we can end the poll. So it's important to know that what are the short term and long term. I think most of the participants would know by now. Majority of us have experienced COVID, or we have a family member or a close friend who has experienced these symptoms and who is experiencing these symptoms. But nevertheless, I will just repeat in quickly. Direct effects are due to COVID infection per se. Short-term effects I will not talk about, but long-term effects which generally get ignored by the healthcare workers also and by the patient themselves as well. Post-traumatic stress disorder, that is repeatedly getting those memories inside your mind and leading to frequent sleep disruptions and attacks, panic attacks. So unresolved grief with lot of guilt attached. I was not able to attend to my father during his or mother or brother or a friend during last days. In fact, I was not even able to meet him. I was not able to attend his funeral also because of the social distancing norms and crowd control measures. So they are important cultural practices. They are inherent in our society, and they give us an avenue to express our emotions or the feelings attached with the patient, and they help us to come to terms with the loss if it has happened. So in case these rituals are not performed or we're not part of them, it's quite likely that some amount of grief will remain unresolved, and it can lead to emotional problems. Substance abuse, it's quite rampant, especially once you know that you're not likely to recover quickly, you have lost your jobs, you have lost source of earning, some family members has died. So substance abuse is something like smoking and drinking. It's quite rampant these days. Occupational problems with loss of job or physical symptoms like fatigue, body ache and sleep. Most common physical symptoms that we are encountering in this patient is fatigue, body ache and sleep problems. So the indirect effect because of lockdown, loneliness, boredom. So again, it can cause relational problems. If you continue to live with your spouse 24 hours in a day, it becomes a little difficult at times. You need your personal space and privacy, and unemployment, suicidal thoughts. Um, though I don't have the data to show, but I hear that suicide rate has increased, especially in those who have lost jobs. And it is not a new phenomenon. It has happened in 2008, in 1930, because in face of economic breakdown or economic loss. And substance abuse also, as I mentioned earlier. So one important aspect that we should know that who all are more likely to develop psychological symptoms. All COVID patients actually do not really develop major psychological symptoms or long-lasting psychological symptoms. In fact, as we know, about 80-90% people don't even require hospitalization. They have only mild symptoms. So they are unlikely to develop long-term any psychological symptoms, or they may not really require a professional help unless they suffered from psychiatric illness in the past. It is only those patients who suffer from serious form of illness, who develop encephalopathy during initial stage, or who require prolonged hospitalization with ventilatory support. So in this we see, if you just focus on this dark red line, it shows the prevalence of psychiatric symptoms, that mood, anxiety, or psychotic symptoms in patients who developed encephalopathy. So as compared to the match controls, the probability was much higher and the difference was significant. Similarly, the blue thick line, it shows the probability of psychiatric symptoms of mood, anxiety, and psychotic symptoms in those who required hospitalization. So this thick blue line refers to people who were hospitalized, COVID patients who were hospitalized, and the maroon or the dark red line shows people who developed some encephalopathy or delirium during the initial stages of illness. So in these two populations, the probability of developing psychiatric symptoms are more. So we know now with this slide that people who developed delirium during initial stages or required hospitalization, So they are our target population. So we must screen them for psychological symptoms during the course of their recovery. So this is our population. This is our target population. So one has to be a little careful. So whenever we interview such patients or they ask something, so we must screen them. In special populations, if you see children and adolescents, they can have excessive tantrums, altered sleeping habits, headache, deteriorating concentration, obesity, loss of interest in studies, and they can be subjected to abuse, physical as well as verbal abuse, or neglect also for that matter, because parents are somehow also facing a lot of difficulties. So they may not be given enough, be able to give enough attention to children. Elderly people also, they feel little lost, irritability, they can manifest irritability, death, which they, what is the point in living now? This life is not worth living. So they have altered sleep and diet habits, emotional outbursts. At times, I've seen my father telling many times, there's no point living any further. And because I stay at home, you stay at home, so we don't have our private space. So in women, they can manifest with irritability and they can be subject to abuse. We don't have data from our country, but at least from South American countries, African countries, many incidents of abuse are happening because husbands are staying at home, they've lost the jobs, so they went out anger at their spouse. Especially population with existing medical illness, like those who are in immunosuppressants, who are on anti-cancer drugs, those who are on chronic inflammatory disorders like SLE or rheumatoid arthritis. So they have excessive worries regarding should they take vaccine. Suppose what will happen to them? Suppose they develop COVID and they have a lot of anxiety and hopelessness. So they are a special population. They deserve these issues need to be addressed. So we can have another poll question. This is regarding the prevalence of anxiety, depression, and sleep problems amongst children. So we had done a survey on school students in Pune as well as in Kolkata and one satellite city of Patiala. So I think the majority have answered. So we can end the poll here. You're right, I think. It is important to note that about 30 to 50% people manifest with anxiety, sleep problems, or depression. So it is quite significant because these things affect their ability to concentrate on studies. So it has a direct bearing on their academic performance. It also affects their interpersonal relations with their siblings as well as parents. So their general behavior at home and their academic performance. And if you ask me what do they miss most, so we had in our survey, we did that question as well. What do they miss most? So they miss most their friends. They miss most their playground. So we have to take some sort of measures to ensure that at least they remain in touch with their friends and they have an outlet. They may not go to crowded play fields or anything, but at least some games at home like chess. Chess doesn't require for them to play but chess is a good game to learn during these times, or in Ludo also, or Carrom board also, or maybe cycling. Cycling is another activity that can be picked up. So children need to be encouraged on for these things because they miss their friends, they miss outdoor activities. And surprisingly, majority of them answered in affirmative when was asked that do they have they lost out on academics? They say no, they have not lost out. So online education is a norm now and children are coping quite well. So when should you intervene? See, most of the time patients just want to share and may not seek exact treatment. They just want to express. They know it will pass. They may have their own mechanisms and want to try. Like they have a lot of faith in cultural practices like ashwagandha, giloy, meditation, kala, and all these things they actually want to try. But in case they have persisting physical and emotional symptoms, apprise them that help is available. Don't just say that you have a psychiatric illness, you have depression, or you have psychosis. Don't say like that. You say that maybe you should undergo screening, help is available. Avoid using psychotropics other than short course of benzodiazepines. So it should be avoided. The sale of clonazepam, lorazepam, and diazepam has skyrocketed in past few months. From there, we can make out that a lot of people are prescribing or they are self-medicating with benzodiazepines. So how should we intervene if we have to do? It is important to keep these things handy, like GHQ-12. It's a simple questionnaire, but very high reliability and validity. Beck Depression Inventory, which gives screen specifically for depression. PHQ-30 is a multi-dimensional instrument. So basically it takes care of your somatic symptoms, your cognitive symptoms, your emotional symptoms. Fairly elaborate, takes about 10 minutes to administer. And Hamilton Depression Scale, which is a standardized scale for screening for depression. So after they score significantly high, that is beyond the cutoff, one should rather wait and monitor progress. So one-time measurement is not really sufficient. So give patients some time, counsel them these are the important symptoms you should watch out for, like sadness, hopelessness, fatigability, poor concentration. They are important symptoms. In case they are present, so we should rather wait for them to subside on their own with simple practices like I'll come to that. Monitor progress and deterioration for a few days or even for a couple of weeks. In case they are not improving or they are worsening, it is better to take the patient into confidence and then refer. However, in case the patient is suicidal, violent, or he scores high on standardized instrument, so that is the time you should not wait. You should rather consult a psychiatrist that this is the case and I would like to refer the patient. It goes beyond saying that our culture has given us a lot, so we must have faith. So activity scheduling, that समय से सोना, समय से उठना, समय से खाना, दिन में prayer करना, like these are standard activity scheduling which we encourage. They help. Managing your time, so prioritizing your health or important tasks at home. So they are important. So you should devote enough time for that. Importance of balanced diet, I will not go into because it should contain carbohydrates, nutrients, fats, proteins, all in balanced quantity. Regular exercise, it helps. No denying the fact. We all know it. Improving your sleep. So that means fixing sleep hours and ensuring good sleep hygiene. Avoiding alcohol and intoxicants like tobacco also. One should rather do that while the patient is recovering. So spirituality comes with our culture. We must have faith and we must have be able to come to terms with our own self. And of course, relationship management, in case you feel that the relationships are not up to the mark, you should rather go and take help, or at least on your own, you should acknowledge it and start taking remedial measures. So I end my presentation here, and I thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity, especially Dr. Krishna, Nandita Rao, Priscilla ma'am. I really want to thank them for their support and encouragement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Saini. Please keep posting questions for Dr. Saini. And as we move on to our next speaker, Dr. Jyoti Shetty. Dr. Shetty is the head of psychiatry at Bharati Vidyapeeth. Dr. Shetty, can you share your screen, please?
Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers, Dr. Priscilla and Dr. Krishnamurthy and others for inviting me for this program today. My presentation would be about healthcare workers' impact and intervention. I think Dr. Rajiv has already actually covered a lot of the psychological symptoms that we see in COVID patients and COVID-related psychosocial issues. So I would not reiterate that. But then and here I would like to also add that healthcare workers, I mean, not only doctors, but obviously us nurses and all our paramedical and paraclinical staff who have been involved in COVID healthcare as frontline workers. So coming to what the challenges have been, we have seen 2 waves in India. And I think everyone is familiar that the second wave was sudden, dramatic, almost overwhelmingly so. In fact, I think the first wave, we seem to have at least sort of the novelty itself. There was a bit of, even in fact, I will say that later, even in my study that we did, that there was some amount of excitement in about actually dealing with a pandemic in our lifetime. But the second wave was unfortunately extremely overwhelming. So the challenges faced by the healthcare workers has varied. Obviously, both the waves, we had large patient numbers. Second wave, much more so. Resources were limited, especially in the first wave, starting with PPEs, the use of them, training, treatment guidelines, administrative issues. I think we're all familiar with that. In the second wave, it was again mostly related to resources and the overwhelming influx of patients. The consequences to the patients, example, death, emotional reactions to the illness, the fear of, the isolation. And in fact, in the second wave, it was also about, we were in it for almost a year, the limitations, the lockdowns, the limited activities that we had, the academic issues that Dr. Rajiv elaborated on, the impact on every member of society. Then, of course, the challenges in the lockdown. In the healthcare workers, it was increasingly so because, especially for women, it was about increased work burden at home, at work, having long duty hours. And this is something nurses have also expressed, being in a PPE the whole day. And for women, it's about, when they are menstruating, about actually having some sort of help during that time. And apart from that, I think regular clinical work also took a hit. So there was less regular clinical work, non-COVID work that was happening. Apart from that, there was a need for innovating in terms of clinical work, telemedicine. We had telemedicine guidelines that were published, telepsychiatry guidelines, in fact. And of course, the psychological reactions to the COVID pandemic, whether or not we were affected by the illness or not. So all healthcare workers have been affected. So usually the normal psychological reactions to COVID-19, Dr. Rajiv has elaborated: anxiety and depressive symptoms, sleep disturbances, uncertainty, insecurity of the future, fear of getting infected. And this is more so for healthcare workers because, going to a COVID hospital like ours was, being in the presence of several COVID patients, not knowing whether they were COVID positive, and coming back home. In the first wave, there were some arrangements done for some health workers being, away from their families. That also had its own consequences, but then at least there was less fear about, infecting people at home. So then they could stay, but that was not so in the second wave. The feeling of helplessness, confronted with so many patients, irritability, anger, fatigue, the emotional isolation, the inability to actually talk with non-medical personnel at home, the stigma attached to, and this was especially so in the first wave, the healthcare workers also felt there was a lot of prejudice and stigma attached to them working in COVID hospitals. Of course, the coping strategies, when you talk about, you have, 2 types of coping strategies: problem solving and emotional strategies. Problem solving would be to seek help, and these are positive strategies: seeking help from another person, obtaining information or advice, solving problems, confrontation, so then, if you actually demanding for PPE, demanding that, they have a right to actually be safe in a safe environment when they're treating patients. Of course, emotional strategies would be to ventilate, to express how they've been, feeling, evaluation of the problem, positive appraisal of the problem. And, avoidance of the problem is a negative way of coping. But then positive appraisal is something, it is about actually addressing the problem as it is and saying that, okay, this is something, this much I can do, prioritizing your actions. Maladopting coping will be obviously with, lifestyle problems like alcohol, using unprescribed drugs, getting aggressive, getting irritable, maybe in extreme cases also deliberate self-harm. And these have been less so in healthcare workers, not so much actually, but then irritability is something that we have seen across the board. So what can we do? We can talk, ventilate, share experiences and reaction. Dr. Rajiv talked about relaxation, exercises, lifestyle management. We also need to accept that we need to withdraw, give ourselves time out, allow for the vulnerability in being in such a situation, reduce the burden of being in charge. So then you don't have to always carry that thing of you're in charge and you have to be in the forefront. Allow for grief reaction and allow for its expression. Address the guilt, the denial, guilt when you lose patients you have done so much for, denial of it also, self-blame, and the helplessness that you feel. Know your limitations and accept that this has been an uncertain time anyway, and it is novel for everyone. Apart from that, I think also because we are working in COVID hospitals, we are in the thick of it, it also requires activities, whether it is your own needs, financial planning, prioritizing chores, including arranging for domestic chores, because that can be an additional burden. So studies on healthcare workers and COVID has been done. There have been studies from Wuhan actually, starting from April 2020. So they have shown that 50% have expressed depressive symptoms, 44% anxiety, 34% insomnia. We had an Indian Journal of Psychiatry, May 2020, we had a West Bengal study, which was an online survey actually by Dr. Sheshadri and others. And it was about attitude, practice, behavior, and mental health impact on doctors in the COVID pandemic. This was in the first wave. 34% expressed a depression, 39% had anxiety symptoms, and 32% had stress symptoms. They used the DAS scale. Then the Indian Journal of Emergency Medicine, there was a review by Shaukat et al. In 2020 about the physical and mental health impacts. And what they reported is, apart from anxiety, depression, and insomnia, which is seen, there was also post-traumatic stress disorder, fatigue, more so in female healthcare workers, especially in nurses, and especially those working in high-risk areas like the ICUs, intensive care units. We also had done this study in the first wave. It was the study taken up by my exam going Dr. Kashish, Dr. Manjushri Datar, my associate professor. It was on the study of psychological consequences, burnout, and coping skills in healthcare workers admitted patients of COVID-19 at Bharti Hospital. So this is in publication, it's gone for publication. Objectives was to identify healthcare workers who are facing psychological issues while working with COVID-19 patients, to assess burnout using the MASLAC burnout inventory, and to identify coping skills used by these healthcare workers. So what we had done was included 52 doctors, 27 nurses, and 21 support staff. So 52 doctors included the residents and faculty COVID area. So it was a qualitative study. So it was basically the themes that came out. The psychological reactions were health related worry, getting infected was about 65%. Fears of transmitting the illness once they go, or transmitting the infection to others at home was 20%. Concerns related to work, whether it was the work atmosphere, the work environment that they were, is 37%. Stigma related to working in a COVID hospital was 5%, significantly low when you look at the fact that, I think there was also pride at being associated with a major hospital which was doing COVID work. Excitement to do work similarly was 14%. Concern for missing on academics, especially in the junior residents who were exam going, JR3s and JR2s was there, 13%. But there was also a positive acceptance, which was about 9%. Of course, what was perceived as stressors was the long working hours, because the junior residents were working 12 hours, including the nurses also. The nurses and the paramedical workers had 8-hour duties, but the junior residents were working for 12 hours. The inadequate PPE, and this was especially in the first wave, it was about, getting the PPEs, getting trained to use them. They were very uncomfortable. So, initially they were very uncomfortable to use. 29% of them reported that it was extremely discomforting. Burden of work and inadequate staff, just getting the resource allocation, which was an administrative issue. So that was again, reported by 23% of people. difficulty communicating with patients, relatives outside the COVID area. And this also was about difficulty communicating amongst themselves while in the PPE. So this was also related to, simple things like a washroom break, having a meal or having fluids between with the PPE was also a difficulty. Apart from that, difficulty communicating with patient relatives, having telecons with them, about counseling daily with them over the telephone. 21% reported that it was quite a problem, and it used to be quite stressful also. Witnessing death, especially, this is not really related to the ICU areas, but even in the wards. So 7% of them reported that some of the residents actually were from what we would say is low mortality areas like dermatology or psychiatry. So then for them actually coming to work in something where there was mortality and significant amount of morbidity was something that was a little bit stressful. Psychological symptoms during duty, it was related to fear and anxiety. 39% of them reported that. Feeling overwhelmed was reported by 12%. Some people also had headaches, a lot of anxiety symptoms, mostly about autonomic arousal, palpitation, giddiness. A few reported crying spells. Irritability was definitely there. In fact, I think in the second wave, there has been increase in irritability, and probably because of the way it has gone on. Sleep disturbance, definitely, and especially people doing duties at night, 12 hours. There was a significant complaint of sleep-wake reversal, not being able to go back to sleep once they came back from their duty. Of course, lack of motivation also was reported by about 8%. And this may go up actually, after people who have dealt with the second wave. Coping strategies that they employed: communicating with the family, spending time with the family. Of few residents talked about playing with their pets, which was really helpful. 38%. Using distraction, music, watching Netflix, or just some sort of distracting maneuver. Sharing their experiences was something that helped in 35%. Avoidance was not a strategy that most employed. Problem solving was a strategy that very frankly was very good to note that 49% utilized that. Acceptance of the situation was there in a majority, in 61%. And 6%, of course, talked about spiritual health and using spirituality as a mode to cope. Of course, it was seen that being married helped in reducing irritability, but this may vary across, I think, individuals. But definitely it increased fears of transmission. So, spouses who are working in the COVID areas obviously had this fear. As I said, in the first wave, probably because some strategies were employed where, because of the novelty of the situation, where COVID workers were actually kept away, or they chose to keep away, but that was not so in the second wave. Using positive coping strategies reduced anxiety, depression, and stress. So this was with regards to the study. So in general, what we would say for the role of mental health professionals, where do they come in? So we can have initial crisis counseling before and after testing for patients. Dr. Rajiv talked about 2 weeks after COVID positivity about having a psychiatric or a psychosocial evaluation. So maybe having some sort of assessment even before that. Supportive counseling in isolation wards. Education on health promotion strategies, which can obviously keep being continued and reiterated, though everyone is familiar with it now after almost 15 months. Group counseling through audiovisual aids. We have become so used to using webinars and using this mode of information exchange. As and when necessary, if not after the first 2 weeks, at least when anyone who is in treating a patient requires, or any healthcare care worker is feeling the need for it, getting a psychiatric evaluation done. Screening of healthcare workers for stress and burnout. Stress management for healthcare workers. This is something that we had done in the first wave, when along with the training for use of PPEs and COVID management, we had a small module which the hospital infection control team had asked us to include on stress management, just talking about what symptoms could be there of stress and how to deal with it with, probably with relaxation exercises. So debriefing sessions, this is something that I think that could be helping and should be done debriefing sessions after COVID duty, when they come out of COVID duty, especially people who have worked in very intensive care areas where there is a lot of morbidity and mortality. So this is something that could help in terms of, it could be done in a group, because there are lots of people coming out of their duty in a group. So probably having that in a group, but having one session and sensitizing them about follow-up as and when necessary. And of course, the administrative role in team building. This is an infographic that the Department of Psychiatry and Humans and the government of Karnataka actually put forward in their manual, Caring for Healthcare Workers. So where we can give mental health support during COVID-19. So as you can see in the, in the infographic, there is absolutely a plan where, you can see that how being mentally unwell can manifest at the workplace with absenteeism, reduced job performance, anger outbursts, crying spells, probably substance use issues, impaired physical functioning. And the common presentations, as we talked about earlier in both the talks, is about anxiety, depression, burnout, maybe even suicidality and death wishes and disturbed sleep. So primary interventions, again, they have elaborated most of the things that we talked about earlier. They have also added about, having a buddy system, having someone actually, and this actually works for residents, where probably having a senior who can guide and mentor a junior who's just coming into the COVID, the COVID treatment system. Apart from, of course, relaxation and lifestyle measures. Of course, secondary interventions would be actually assessing for major psychiatric issues, anxiety, depression, insomnia, managing suicidality or self-harm if it is there, addressing the substance use disorders. And of course, if there is pre-existing mental illness, about focusing on how you can prevent any sort of breakdown during, when the healthcare worker is actually doing the duty, and giving some amount of, support that time. Apart from that, also specific issues in COVID-19, which is about the quarantine, the stigma, the life and death decision that I think in the second wave has been a little traumatic in terms of, because of resource allocation, probably prioritizing which, simple things like a bed which is available and who gets the priority for that bed. I think it is much more so where the resources have been very poor. And of course, a referral system which should be in place when there is increasing aggressive, violent behavior, uncontrolled substance use, severe mental illness which is being displayed, high suicidal risk, and when there has been no improvement in primary or secondary interventions. So I'll end my talk here. I did not have any sort of actually quiz or question to be asked.
Thank you, Dr. Shetty.
Thank you.
It was fantastic information, as to Dr. Saini. So in the interest of time, I'm going to focus a couple of questions for conversation. So one was bereavement. I know Dr. Saini posted bereavement of a, loss of a colleague. And Dr. Pise talked about, children getting orphaned. Do you want to, either of you want to talk about that, or both of you?
Yeah, I think, am I heard? Yes.
Yeah.
Obviously as someone has commented in the chat box, the Supreme Court has asked the governments, the state governments to address it on orphan children. There are members of the Indian Psychiatric Society who have been addressing groups. In fact, Dr. Anjali Chabria of Mumbai, she and her, her team has been addressing bereavement, grief counseling sessions. There's Dr. Simi Viraj in Chandigarh, who's been also addressing. There is a national helpline in terms of which NIMHANS has put out for mental health counseling, which is free and accessible. Apart from that, as I said, Dr. Chabria, apart from the grief counseling that is there, they've also tried to do, or at least they plan to do, about children who have been orphaned. So, with regards to whether to address the issues, the behavioral and emotional issues that are there, very frankly, as far as the logistics of taking care of them, that is something that is administrative. That is what the governments need to do. But emotional support is something that definitely that can be done by mental health workers.
Thank you. And what do you and Dr. Saini, you brought up the question about death of a colleague. Do you want to talk about that? I know that many of us had dealt with that.
So it is one thing which puts us on back foot. In fact, if you see during the second wave and after the second wave, the COVID fatigue has set in even amongst healthcare workers. So they stopped taking precautions, and that is why we had so many doctor deaths. Firstly, they were reluctant to take vaccine, and secondly, they were not very careful while taking measures against spread of COVID. And that is how we lost quite a few of our colleagues. But after we saw it happening, and we definitely went on a back foot, and it definitely changed our behaviors and practices. So it calls for introspection, because we are role models for the society. So we have to exercise more restraint as far as the COVID fatigue is concerned. That is my solution.
Thank you. Dr. Kinjalk, I know that you have some personal perspective as well as about the trainee physicians and what they underwent. Can you, I know you posted on the chat. Do you want to talk about that, please?
Sir, good morning from Muzaffarpur, sir. I think because I have been seeing patients myself, and my children, they are in Pune, Delhi. They all have been working in COVID wards in the first wave as well as in the second wave, sir. It suffices to say that they have gone through heavy stress, sir. In the hospitals, there is no system to address their psychological issues. We talk and we may say that we have got the protocols there, but in practice, this is not, I mean, it's a rare thing to see that this is being addressed. Number one, working for 12 hours, not just 12 hours, even at times 18 hours at stretch in PPE kit. It's been, I must say it's been inhuman conditions. Number two, sir, about the death of doctors, it's not just that the doctors were careless, it's also that the doctors were exposed to repeated sources of infections without proper precautions which could have been provided by the management. And number three, when I was just watching one of the posts about the orphan children, since I was a member of the Child Rights Commission here for 2 terms, and even right now I am working on it. So orphaned children, sir, this is a very big issue. In fact, I had written a letter to Supreme Court of India 3 months ago. And the directive that came from Supreme Court, that was in response to many more letters from other agencies also. So it's not just the orphaned children. The orphaned children are that is a group that is being targeted for smuggling children into illegal sex racket. Number two, child trafficking, the organ business, and these are the child labor. And then these are the children who will be the dropouts from the school. So the NGOs, even yesterday I was in one of the meetings of Rotary, whole of Bihar and Jharkhand, I was talking about it. So right now the NGOs should be roped in with the help of doctors, and you should approach the district administration, because they are the nodal agencies, and ask them to have a list of those orphan children and how you can help them. One is through child welfare committees, they are in place, and number two, utilizing the Right to Education Act to get them into their schools. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Kinjalk. Thank you very much. So any final questions to our speakers, because we have a couple of other things to talk about today. Go ahead.
So there was one question in the Google form, but the person has forgot to enter his name. He is asking for the resources for training and referral in the rural areas on how to address mental health issues.
Dr. Shetty, do you have a comment?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yes, as I said, there are lots of resources anyway on the net. And apart from that, Department of Psychiatry in NIMHANS has come out with a couple of booklets I mean, they have guidelines for telepsychiatry. This is with the Indian Psychiatric Society. The Department of Psychiatry in MANS, what I actually gave the infographic is from there. It gives resources. I mean, it gives, sort of guidelines on what to address, how the presentations are, and what we can do. So, so it is both for mental health care professionals and for healthcare workers. So it is easily downloadable. If anyone wants it, they can always write to me. So I can, I'll type in my email ID here. So I can
Yeah.
send it who's interested.
Wonderful, because you're a very senior person in Bharati Vidyapeeth, heading psychiatry there. So you would be a wonderful resource for people trying to reach out to you. Thank you. Dr. Hazra, you had a comment.
Yes, Krishna. Actually, I have been part of the initiative for young adults and adolescents through COVID first wave and second wave. And I think very often, though this is not probably where we've spoken much about young adults and adolescents, very often we tend to forget about these young adults and adolescents at home, while we as healthcare workers, kind of help the others in the community. So what I had started in the hospital that I was working in was kind of telling my paramedical staff, civilian staff and workers that to keep an eye out for any kind of mental health issues that adults at home are facing. Talk to them, be aware about it. I think awareness is the first step to any action. Just wanted to share this. Thanks.
Thank you. And I know one person had their hand up, and I'm just trying to locate who the person is. So, oh, that was you, Nandita. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Hazra. So I wanted to share a couple of things. So this knowledge exchange, we've now been doing this consistently since the beginning of the second wave. And we've addressed a lot of topics, and it's been really quite exciting for a lot of us to hear all the expertise that's there and all the participation by, frontline clinicians. So I think that as COVID has become, somewhat less, let's hope for the best, I think that we can take a slight break in, trying to do this every week. So we hope to space this out now and meet again in 2 weeks. One of our big areas of focus now going forward is long COVID. We already had a session on that. I'd like to share with you that an international cohort, standard procedure is being developed, and we'll soon be able to share this in Pune and elsewhere in India. So to really streamline how we are evaluating and following these patients. So in 2 weeks, we'll meet again, and we'll talk about physical therapy and rehabilitation for COVID. The other thing is we're continuing to build capacity in Pune. Our folks from Jhpiego are doing training, and in a second, I'll request folks from Jhpiego to talk about that. But this is an area of focus, so that unfortunately, this is not the last time there's going to be a pandemic flu. So the goal is never again will we be caught unprepared. So that is our goal. Also, we are in active discussion to start clinical trials in Pune for a new drug in that may be useful in COVID. And so really, as a result of all of these collaborations, we hope to contribute to the wonderful work that all of you are already doing in Pune. So I'll just request the team from Jhpiego, if you're ready, to talk about just briefly about some of the capacity building that's going on and is being planned. Dr. Shinde? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Lakshman. So in collaboration with Bharati Vidyapeeth Critical Care Department, Dr. Shiva Iyer sir and his team, we have done 2 batches for the adult COVID-19 patients management at the District Hospital Pune. And this Friday will be the 3rd and the last batch. In addition to this, yesterday there was a visit of Dr. Bhakti Sarangi from Bharati Vidyapeeth Pediatric Department. And we also had a discussion and round of pediatric infrastructure at there in district hospitals. And from the first week of August, we'll be starting some training programs for the nurses and doctors. It will be a hybrid model of online training followed by some contact session. In addition to this, there was also a discussion of 7 days posting of district hospital nurses at the pediatric ICU of Bharti to get some hands-on experience. So these are the things currently in the pipeline. We are also exploring opportunities to work with the Pune Rural, with the district health officer of Pune and 2 corporations in the near future. Thank you.
Sorry, we lost you.
Kunal here. This is Dr. Kunal. I just want to come from behalf of Japaico that we are also exploring, just continue where we lost from Akash, is we are also trying to reach out to the rural part of Pune, and we are going to have the discussions, initial discussions with the district health officers who looks after the rural part of Pune, DHO, and will take his lead and then work on that aspect also. So these are some of the initial preparatory activities that we are planning. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I just wanted to share that while we may be doing fewer, less frequent meetings, but the real work of capacity building, that's really building up steam. So we look forward to working with you and in your support and collaboration to really contribute to all the wonderful work you're already doing to build even more capacity. And so with that, I'd like to thank Dr. Shetty and Dr. Saini and all of the people who put this together, and each one of you, and with best wishes as you go forward in taking care of your patients and your communities. Have a good day if you're in Pune, and good night if you're in the United States or elsewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will see you again.
Thank you.